Regal reads Chapter 4, The Law of Navigation, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, John C. Maxwell. Anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. In 1911, two groups of explorers set off on an incredible mission. Though they used different strategies and routes, the leaders of the teams had the same goal: to be the first in history to reach the South Pole. Their stories are life and death illustrations of the law of navigation. One group was led by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. Ironically, Amundsen had not originally intended to go to Antarctica. His desire was to be the first man to reach the North Pole. But when he learned that Robert Peary had beaten him there, Amundsen changed his goal and headed to the other end of the earth. North or south, he knew his planning would pay off. Amundsen carefully charted his course. Before his team ever set off, Amundsen had assessed the coming challenges and painstakingly planned his trip. He studied the methods of the indigenous Arctic people and other experienced cold weather travelers, and he determined that their best course of action would be to transport all their equipment and supplies by dog sled. When he assembled his team, he chose expert skiers and dog handlers. His strategy was simple. The dogs would do most of the work as the group traveled 15 to 20 miles in a 6-hour period each day. That would afford both the dogs and the men plenty of time for daily rest prior to the next day's travel. Amundsen's forethought and attention to detail were incredible. He located and stocked supply depots all along the intended route. That way they would not have to carry every bit of their supplies with them the whole trip. He also equipped his people with the best gear possible. Before he set off, Amundsen had taken the trip in his mind, carefully considering every possible aspect of the journey, thinking it through and planning accordingly, and it paid off. The worst problem they experienced on their trip was an infected tooth one man needed to have extracted. Scott violated the law of navigation. The other team of people was led by Robert Falcon Scott, a British naval officer who had previously done some exploring in the Antarctic area. Scott's expedition was the antithesis of Amundsen's. Instead of using dog sleds, Scott decided to use motorized sledges and ponies. Their problem began when the motors on the sledges stopped working only 5 days into the trip. The ponies didn't fare well either in those frigid temperatures. When they reached the foot of the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, all of the poor animals had to be killed. As a result, the team members themselves ended up hauling the 200-pound sledges. It was arduous work. Scott hadn't given enough attention to the team's other equipment either. Everyone on the team developed frostbite and became snowblind because of inadequate clothing and goggles. The team was always low on food and water. The depots of supplies were inadequately stocked, too far apart, and poorly marked, making them very difficult to find. Because they were continually low on fuel to melt the snow, everyone became dehydrated, making things even worse for Scott's last-minute decision to take along a 5th man, even though they had prepared enough supplies for only 4. After covering a grueling 800 miles in 10 weeks, Scott's exhausted group finally arrived at the South Pole on January 17, 1912. There, they found the Norwegian flag flapping in the wind and a letter from Amundsen. The other well-led team had beaten them there by more than a month. If you don't live by the law of navigation, ... Scott's expedition to the South Pole is a classic example of a leader who could not navigate for his people, but their trek back was even worse. Scott insisted that they collect and carry back 30 pounds of geological specimens, more weight to be carried by the worn-out men. The group's progress became slower and slower. One member of the party sank into a stupor and died. Another, suffering severe frostbite, purposely walked out into a blizzard to keep from hindering the group. Before he left the tent, he said, "I am just going outside. I may be some time." Jesus. Scott and his final 2 team members made it only a little farther north before giving up. They died 150 miles from their base camp. We know their story only because they spent their last hours updating their diaries and writing letters. Some of the last words Scott wrote were, We have been to the pole, and we shall die like gentlemen. I think this will show that the spirit of pluck and power to endure has not passed out of our race. We very nearly came through, and it's a pity to have missed it. But lately I have felt that we have overshot the mark. Scott had great courage, but only at the end did he recognize his shortcomings. Finally, he saw that anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Because he did not live by the law of navigation, he and his companies died by it. Navigators see the trip ahead. One thing all leaders have in common is the ability to see more and before. They see more than others do because they see the big picture, which not all people grasp, and they see what's coming before others do. This gives them an advantage when it comes to navigating for the people they lead. And today, with the rapid pace of life, that ability to see before others do is especially important so that they don't let their team get blindsided. The larger the organization someone leads, the more clearly the leader has to be able to see ahead. That's true because sheer size makes mid-course corrections more difficult. And if there are errors in navigation, many more people are affected than when a leader is traveling alone or with a few people. The disaster of the Titanic was a good example of that kind of problem. The crew could not see far enough ahead to avoid the iceberg altogether. And because of the size of the ship, they could not maneuver enough to change course once the object was in view. The result was that more than 1,000 people lost their lives. Where the leader goes, ... First-rate navigators always have in mind that people are depending on them and their ability to chart a good course. I read an observation by James A. Autry in Life and Work, A Manager's Search for Meaning, that illustrates this idea. He wrote that occasionally you hear about the crash of 4 military planes flying together in formation. The reason for the loss of all 4 is this: when jet fighters fly in groups of 4, one pilot, the leader, designate where the team will fly. The other 3 planes fly on the leader's wing, adjusting to him and following wherever he goes. Whatever moves the leader makes, the rest of the team will make along with him. That's true whether he soars in the clouds or smashes into a mountaintop. Before good leaders take their people on a journey, they take steps to give the trip the best chance for success. 1. Navigators keep their emotions from clouding their vision. Recently, I came across something writer and Professor C.S. Lewis wrote in 1948 because people were worried about dying as a result of the atomic bomb. It reminded me of the fear people experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Lewis wrote, "We think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age?" I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed as you are already living in the age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. It is perfectly ridiculous to go out about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. No matter the conditions we face, leaders must not panic. They can't let the circumstances prevent them from seeing more and before and from navigating people through their difficulties. Tom Morris, in his book Plato's Lemonade Stand, offers a metaphor that can help leaders avoid getting caught up in the emotion that might otherwise paralyze them. Imagine life as a large wagon wheel, writes Morris. If we emotionally live on the outer rim, then as the wheel turns, we'll be spun around to extreme highs and lows in rapid and dizzying succession. But if we can learn to move closer in toward the midpoint of the hub, we become more centered. The wheel will still spin, but we won't be so dramatically thrown by its motion. That's a position of power. The best navigators are able to delay their emotions long enough to work through a problem when people are depending on them to lead. How can they do that? First, by knowing and staying true to their definition of success. For example, the definition of success that guides me internally states that success is having having those closest to me love and respect me the most. This keeps me grounded and faithful. My external definition of success is knowing my purpose, growing to my potential, and sowing seeds that benefit others. Those two definitions give me perspective as I face challenges. The second factor that helps good navigators keep their head in the midst of difficult circumstances is dedication to being bigger on the inside than the outside. This comes from having more faith than fear and from embracing good values. When facing difficult times, values keeps us from losing our way or giving up. Number two, navigators draw on past experiences. Every past success and failure you've experienced can be a valuable source of information and wisdom if you allow it to be. While successes can teach you what you're capable of doing and gives you confidence, failures often teach greater losses. They reveal wrong assumptions, character flaws, errors in judgment, and poor working methods. Ironically, many people hate their failures so much that they quickly cover them up instead of analyzing them and learning from them. As I explain in my book, Failing Forward, if you fail to learn from your mistakes, you're going to fail again and again. Why do I even mention something that seems so basic? Because most natural leaders are activists. They tend to look forward, not backward, make decisions, and move on. I know this because that is my tendency, but I'm not very good at navigating. It's one of my leadership weaknesses. Good navigators take time to reflect and learn from their experiences. I wrote about this in my book, How Successful People Think, but allow me to recount some advantages of reflective thinking here. Reflective thinking gives you true perspective, gives emotional integrity to your thought life, increases your confidence in decision making, clarifies the big picture, takes a good experience and makes it a valuable experience. Each benefit gives a leader a great advantage when planning next steps for a team or organization. 3, navigators examine the conditions before committing. Drawing on experience means looking inward. Examining conditions means looking outward. No good leader plans a course of action without paying close attention to current conditions. That would be like setting sail against the tide or plotting a course into a hurricane. Good navigators look at the present and try to anticipate the future so that they can count the cost before making commitments for themselves and their team. They examine not only measurable factors, such as finances, resources, and talent, but also intangibles such as timing, morale, momentum, culture, and so on. I'll discuss this more in the laws of intuition and timing. 4, navigators listen to others. No matter how much you learn from the past, it will never tell you all that you need to know about the present. No matter how good a leader you are, you will not see everything you need to. That's why top-notch navigators gather information from many sources. For example, before Roald Amundsen's expedition to the South Pole, he learned from a group of Native Americans in Canada about warm clothing and Arctic survival techniques. Those skills and practices meant the difference between failure and success for his team in Antarctica. Navigating leaders get ideas from many sources. They listen to members of their leadership team. They talk to the people in their organization to find out what's happening at the grassroots level. And they spend time with leaders from outside the organization who can mentor them. They always think in terms of relying on a team, not just themselves. 5, navigators balance both faith and fact, or fact and faith. Being able to navigate for others requires a leader to possess a positive attitude. You've got to have faith that you can take your people all the way. If you can't confidently make the trip in your mind, you're not going to be able to take it in real life. On the other hand, you also have to be able to realistically deal with facts. You can't minimize obstacles or rationalize challenges and still navigate effectively. Pretending obstacles don't exist won't help. You have to overcome them. If you don't go into it with your eyes wide open, you're going to get blindsided. Jim Collins confirmed this balance between faith and fact in his 2001 book, Good to Great. He calls it the Stockdale Paradox after Admiral Jim Stockdale, and writes, "You must retain faith that you will prevail in the end, and you must also confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. Balancing optimism and realism, intuition and planning, faith and fact can be very difficult, but that's what it takes to be effective as a navigating leader." A lesson in navigation. I remember the first time I really understood the importance of the law of navigation. I was 28 years old, and I wanted to lead my organization through a difficult challenge unlike anything I've ever done before, but I was aware of my shortcomings as a navigator. I took no joy in getting into logistical details, and I was impatient, so to help me create a way forward in the navigation process, I developed a strategy that I have used repeatedly in my leadership. I wrote it as an acrostic based on plan ahead so that I would always be able to remember it. P, predetermine a course of action. L, lay out your goals. A, adjust your priorities. N, notify your key personnel. A, allow time for acceptance. H, head into action. E, expect problems. A, always point to the successes. D, daily review your plan. Leaders who are good navigators plan ahead. They see more and before others, and they prepare more and before. This enables them to find a way forward as well as convey confidence and gain trust from people. Great leaders do all that. Plus, they make navigational adjustments, changing course when they need as they go along. More than once, Robert Falcon Scott could have made navigational adjustments that might have saved his team. When the motorized sledges failed, he could have turned back. Or when they realized the ponies couldn't make the trip into the mountains, instead, he valued reaching the pole more than keeping his team alive. He demonstrated an inflexibility that prevented him from making good decisions. In the end, it's not the size of the project that determines its acceptance, support, and success. It's the size of the leader. That's why I say that anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Navigating a pandemic. For leaders to be at their best, they need to do all 21 laws well. But at the same time, nobody does all 21 well. However, I am fortunate to have someone leading my organizations who is better at navigations than I am, Mark. Of all the laws, I'm probably worst at the law of navigation. I was reminded of his ability to chart the course as the COVID-19 pandemic struck in the spring of 2020. In February 2020, Mark and I were in Israel leading our troops of the Holy Land. When we were about a week and a half away from the end of the tour, we began hearing news about a potential pandemic on the horizon. Already in some countries, officials were talking about shutting down travel. We started to have concerns about getting everyone in our group home from Israel and getting home ourselves. We were then 4 weeks away from holding our twice annual International Maxwell Certification IMC event, our biggest conference of the year. More than 3,000 people from 64 nations had signed up, and they were scheduled to attend. We needed to figure out whether to hold the conference or cancel it, but there was a lot on the line. If we canceled the conference, we could lose millions of dollars. We had already given money to the hotel in Orlando where we held the conference, and we would also be responsible to pay for a huge block of rooms, whether or not they were used. Plus, we had a deadline in a few days to pay an additional $1 billion for food. We had a decision to make. We could plow ahead and hold the conference. Everything in the United States was still open for business. The airlines were flying. We could tell everyone who had signed up to come. That would save us financially, but what would it do to the people who had signed up for the conference? Mark took ownership of navigating the company through those decisions. His values were his guiding principles. Our number one value is valuing people, Mark said. We were in Israel experiencing the stress of not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing if we would be able to get on planes to go home. I knew that the people signed up for the IMC were experiencing that same stress and doubt. We waited as late as we could to make the call because we wanted to see what would happen, said Mark. But in the end, we needed to do what was right for the people. We canceled the event in time for people to change their travel early enough to get their money back. The decision was difficult but clear. Mark said simply, sometimes it costs money to put people first. Whoop. Mark did the right thing, and we were prepared to deal with the negative financial fallout. But then 2 weeks later, something happened. Walt Disney World closed and the hotels in Orlando shut down. Our company wasn't going to be responsible for rooms that could not be occupied. Mark used that opportunity to work with the hotel to renegotiate our deal with them for future IMC events. But we still had thousands of people anxious to be certified as John Maxwell Team JMT coaches. What were we going to do about that? With the help of our staff, Mark navigated that too. They created a virtual event in August 2020, and we ended up training and certifying more than 6,000 coaches virtually. It was the largest training we ever held. Since then, Mark has developed a system in which we train a large group as we can in person according to circumstances, while simultaneously providing virtual training to people not traveling to Orlando. It's become a huge win for the coaches and for us. That's what good leaders do. They do more than steer the ship. They chart the course. When they practice the law of navigation, they create wins for the people on their team, the organization, and everyone they serve. What could be better than that? That right there is chapter 4 of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. What a regal read. On to chapter 5.